did the right thing.
Hello everybody, I hope you're all well. So today's video is going to be the second part to my parent issues series. The first part was all about mummy issues and I would recommend to watch that if you haven't watched that one already. I'll leave the link down below. But today's video is going to be all about daddy issues. This video is going to be similar to my last one. I'm going to be doing a brief discussion about the psychology, how daddy issues can manifest themselves differently in men and women, representation in pop culture and social media, but I'm also going to be talking about the romanticization, glamorization and sexualization of daddy issues. Daddy issues are very commonly associated with women, in particular damaged women, and how daddy issues can affect the type of men they seek out and the type of relationships they get themselves into. But daddy issues are not just exclusive to women. Men can have daddy issues also, non-binary people can have daddy issues, and of course they do manifest themselves very differently. In this video I will be doing two different segments, how daddy issues affect women and how daddy issues affect men. I'm not doing a segment about how daddy issues sort of affect non-binary people because I do not know. I've tried doing research and I really couldn't find that much about it, but obviously being LGBTQ+ can really affect the relationship between you and your dad. But if anyone who is LGBTQ+ would like to share their stories about what their relationship with their dad is like, then please feel free to do so in the comments. And in the context of relationships, daddy issues are often used as a very negative descriptor and are usually targeted at women. For example, you hear a lot, she's only attracted to older men, she must have daddy issues, she's always in toxic relationships, she must have daddy issues, she can't live without a boyfriend, she must have daddy issues, and the list goes on and on and on. This video is probably going to contain a lot more information than my last video did, just because there is a lot more resources about daddy issues than there is for mummy issues, and on top of that, this is a subject which I can really relate to. I'm going a little bit off script here, we're going on a wild one. This video was a weird one for me to research for and script, because usually the types of videos I do, I'm not necessarily affected by the topics that I'm talking about. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details, but like this was a really hard video. Not necessarily hard, this was just a bit of a weird video for me to research for. I kept putting it off. I wanted to do it, but I also didn't want to do it, kind of thing. First things first, what are daddy issues? I had to go to my personal favourite website, one of my favourite sources, Urban Dictionary. The Urban Dictionary definition of daddy issues is the result of a messed up relationship with one's father or having an absent father, results in younger women chasing older men and even seeking out mistreatment in some cases. And then another definition I found of daddy issues is an informal phrase for the psychological challenges resulting from an absent or abnormal relationship with one's father, often manifesting in a distrust of or sexual desire for men who act as father figures. The almost root of the term daddy issues was Freud's father complex, and father complex was a term used to describe a man who has a distrusting relationship with his father. Again, like I said in my last video, I don't necessarily agree with all of Freud's conclusions, but Freud did really start the conversation of how much of a big impact your relationship with your parents can have on the rest of your life. But as the father complex was explored further, it started being associated with both men and women, and then the father complex eventually developed into the term daddy issues, which is often only associated with women. But one thing which is glaringly obvious about daddy issues is there seems to be a very large focus on how it results in younger women chasing older men, and the effect it has on women's desires and what they're attracted to, but I will elaborate more on this point later in the video. The most common cause for daddy issues is absence. Unlike with mummy issues, which is often a flaw in the relationship, it is very common for dads to just leave their children outright. There's a multitude of reasons why. A very big reason for it is custody laws. Unless a father requests specifically, dads are often expected to have their children once or twice a month. And often what happens when parents split or get divorced is the dad will have a very small amount of custody, and they may get a new partner and have more kids and almost have a new family, and the children from his previous relationship, not seeing him very often anyway, feel very left behind. But it's not just abandonment that can cause daddy issues, especially because dads are becoming more and more present in their children's lives. 50-50 custody is growing in popularity. More and more daddy issues seem to be caused by flaws in the relationship rather than the lack of a relationship. Daddy issues can be caused by abandonment, unaffectionate fathers, overbearing and pressuring fathers, fathers that work too much, fathers that were present but made no effort to create any bond or spend any time with you, emotionally unavailable fathers, fathers that treat their partners badly, whether it's anything from cheating to abuse, fathers with mental illness or addiction. A relationship with any parent, but especially with fathers, can become very complicated if you're LGBT+ also. Obviously there are so many other reasons why people have daddy issues, and it's not just as black and white as my dad left me, or my dad's unaffectionate, or my dad's too overbearing. It's a lot more complex and complicated than that, and there's often a lot of contributing factors, and a lot of the time people, especially men, don't even realise they have daddy issues, especially because there seems to be an almost stereotype of the typical person that has daddy issues, which is a young woman who chases after older men. The reason I wanted to discuss daddy issues within men first is because not only is the origin of the term daddy issues from Freud's father complex, which focuses solely on the relationship between a father and his son, but I also think the father-son relationship has been brushed under the rug for quite a long time. I honestly think it's mostly to do with the ongoing stigma around male emotions, and that it still isn't considered normal for men to be open about their emotions and their mental health and their feelings. But similar to the mother-daughter relationship, no one talks about how toxic the father-son relationship can be, because it's sort of viewed as this flawless, perfect relationship. You know, you always hear people say like fathers and their sons and stuff like that, you know. And another reason why I think daddy issues within men is not spoken about nearly as much as daddy issues within women is because it's very, very hard to sexualize men's daddy issues. I will elaborate more on this later, but often when women have daddy issues, it affects their relationships and the type of men they seek out. Meanwhile, when straight men have daddy issues, it often affects the way they treat women, their self-esteem and their self-perception. As I've said, daddy issues can be caused by a multitude of different complex reasons, and it's never really very straightforward. For men, they may have very intense feelings of competition with other men due to the repressed anger they feel towards their fathers, or perhaps avoiding friendships with men who you could see as a father figure out of fear. Men who have absent fathers may struggle with insecurities within their masculinity because they haven't had a father figure to identify with, or if they have a father figure which they don't want to identify with, or they don't want to be similar to, such as a cheating father or an abusive father, they may still have insecurities within their masculinity because they feel like they don't have any male role models in their life that they identify with. When men have daddy issues, it doesn't just affect their future relationships or their self-esteem, it can also affect the way they raise their own children, in particular the way they raise their sons. For example, they may have felt pressured to achieve goals that they didn't want to achieve when they were children by their own fathers. They may have had very overbearing and pressuring fathers. Therefore, they end up pressuring their sons the same way their dad did to them. They often end up living vicariously through their sons, and this is a very, very hard cycle to break because it literally goes down for generations. And then there is fathers who show absolutely no affection to their sons, which in my opinion can be very problematic. Male affection in general is very stigmatized, and because the father-son relationship dynamic is rarely spoken about, men for generations have been taught that any kind of affection isn't masculine. Because of their daddy issues, men tend to develop unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with them, especially because daddy issues are often only associated with women, so very often men that have daddy issues don't even realise they have them, so these problems can go unresolved for years and end up snowballing. One thing which men with daddy issues may do do is they may treat their future partners badly, especially if their dad treated their mum the same way. They may know that it isn't right, but because it's what they've grown up with, they think that it's the norm. And every relationship should be like that, and every relationship is like that. Freud actually had a theory for this. It's called repetition compulsion, and it is the urge to repeat what you experienced in your childhood. Women with daddy issues tend to do this by seeking out partners who will act more as a father figure rather than a boyfriend. Men who grew up with fathers who didn't treat their mothers very well tend to be very unconcerned and aloof and unaffectionate because they don't know anything else. This is where it gets very complicated and complex. Now, don't get me wrong, men that have daddy issues, it can still be as equally as complicated. But the difference is society's perception on women with mummy issues is very different. It often goes hand in hand with romanticisation and in particular sexualisation. We are taught that the bond between a father and their daughter is very special. You know, daddy's little girl, dads and their daughters, dads are always going to protect their daughters, and apparently when men have a daughter it really changes them as a person. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of my daddy issues, but as someone who doesn't have this bond, I'm very bitter, I'm very envious. It makes me really sad. Just talk about me and my personal experience for a second. One thing I've noticed with how my daddy issues has affected me is how much it affects how I seek validation. For as long as I can remember, I've always valued the opinions of men over women. When a woman would compliment me, I wouldn't really think anything of it or even believe it. But when a man complimented me, for some reason, it meant so much more. And ever since I was a very young teenager, probably like 11, 12, 13, I've always wanted a boyfriend. I have had boyfriends, by the way, and I don't want a boyfriend at the moment. When I was very young, I always wanted a boyfriend. For a very long time, between the ages of 12 and 18, boys never used to find me attractive, which is fine. Boys actually used to call me ugly at school, which was great. And because I put all of my self-value into what boys thought of me, for a majority of my life, I thought I was very ugly. And I am still working on this to not be seeking validation through what men think of me, but because my brain has been working like this for a majority of my life, it is a really difficult habit to unlearn. And I do think the reason why I seeked validation through men was because of my daddy issues. I've always wanted to have a romantic relationship with men. I've always wanted to have friendships with men, and I think a reason for that is because I didn't have any male figures that I was particularly close with growing up. I really lacked any male validation in my life. Before I discuss many people's perceptions of women with daddy issues, the first thing I want to discuss is the traits that women with daddy issues may have. The most well-known daddy issues trait is being attracted to older men. Not everyone who is attracted to older men has daddy issues, and not everyone with daddy issues is attracted to older men. The reason for this attraction is as simple as craving a father figure type presence because you lacked one throughout your whole life. And the person you are attracted to may not be physically older, but they may have a very fatherly and caring energy. But it's more often than not that rather than being attracted to an older man, women with daddy issues tend to be attracted to toxic men. I do think the term toxic is overused, and because of its overuse, it tends to become quite diluted. What is a toxic boyfriend? It can be someone who's manipulative, it can be someone who gaslights you, who is very hot and cold, who is a purposefully bad communicator. There's also emotional, mental and physical abuse on top of that. And you guys may be thinking, why would someone with daddy issues be attracted to someone like that? It doesn't seem very fatherly. But if you grew up with a toxic father, someone who is constantly in and out of your life, emotionally unavailable, overbearing, abusive, etc., this all links to Freud's repetition compulsion. We have an urge to repeat our childhood experiences because it's what we are familiar with. Women with daddy issues tend to be subconsciously attracted to men which highlight these unresolved issues, which very often happens to be toxic men. It's often men they need to chase, it's often men which make them feel very insecure in themselves, and women will often repeat this over and over again until it becomes a cycle because it's very familiar to them. And for a lot of people, familiarity is comfort. Women with daddy issues tend to have very low self-esteem and a very distorted perception of themselves because the one man that was meant to love them the most in the world, they have a very toxic relationship with. Daddy issues tend to go hand in hand with trust issues. When you grow up with a dad who is constantly letting you down, disappointing you, giving you empty promises, breaking promises. And when it comes to dads especially, you look up to them so much as children that even when they are letting you down over and over again, you constantly give them chances and you constantly think that they are the best person in the world. It takes a very long time for the trust between a dad and their child to be broken. I'm talking years and years of being let down. So when that trust is finally broken after years and years of being let down, it's really, really hard to trust anyone else again. So you end up in this awkward predicament of seeking validation from men because you lacked male role models and male figures and male father figures in your life. But also you find it very difficult to trust any man at all, which often leads to a lot of women with daddy issues getting into very toxic relationships. And because women with daddy issues tend to seek validation from men, they can end up being very overprotective and very jealous in their relationships. And because they are seeking validation, they need reassurance to the point of excess. If their own dad can break their trust, then anyone can. If their own dad can leave them, then anyone can. If they feel like their own dad stopped loving them, then anyone can. And this need for excessive reassurance and validation is often very much rooted in abandonment issues also. Getting into a romantic relationship when you have daddy issues can be really complicated because on one hand, because of the lack of a father figure in your life, you seek attention and validation and reassurance from men. But at the same time, if your relationship doesn't have any sort of conflict or toxicity, you begin to lose interest because of the lack of familiarity. You often end up self-sabotaging your own relationships if it's going well because it does feel like unfamiliar territory. But it isn't just abandonment or a way a father treats his daughter which can cause daddy issues. It's also the way a father treats their partner, their daughter's mother. I know this sounds obvious, but if you grow up in a household where your father treated your mother badly, you will begin to think it's normal. It will literally be ingrained in your head that that is normal behaviour and that is love. So you tolerate bad treatment from men, and when a man doesn't treat you badly, you almost think they're too nice. There's no denying that there is far more representation of daddy issues than mummy issues within pop culture, such as TV shows, films and music. And to be fair, a lot of the daddy issues representation is actually very accurate. 3 shows which I think portrayed daddy issues in a very, very good way was Euphoria, Mad Men and This Is England. But one thing I noticed whilst researching for this video, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, sorry I'm holding a tissue, I was crying, there doesn't seem to be a film which focuses on an individual character and her daddy issues / toxic relationship with their dad. There almost isn't a daddy issues version of Lady Bird, which I think is a shame. I think it's nice to explore women's daddy issues and even men's daddy issues and how it affects someone as an individual, how it affects them as a teenager and a young adult without any sort of romanticization. I do feel like whenever daddy issues is discussed, it's often in reference to how it affects women's romantic and sexual endeavours. But it does impact other parts of women's lives, such as their relationship with their mum, their friendships, their self-esteem, their self-perception. It would be nice to focus on all the complexities when it comes to daddy issues, not just how it affects a woman's love life. There is a real lack of representation within pop culture of men with daddy issues. The reason for this is because it's very hard to sexualise men's daddy issues. When men have daddy issues, it often affects their self-perception, their self-esteem, and the way they treat women. The most representation that men with daddy issues have is in Disney Channel original movies, when the main character decides he wants to pursue singing rather than baseball and says to his dad, "I'm not giving up my dream, Dad. I'm giving up yours." And as I've said, it seems to be a very small pool of shows which really focus on the complexity of daddy issues, which I find really, really weird, because there is such a small amount of shows that really focus on this, but there are so many bad dads and bad fathers within television and film. It's a very common trope. It's literally called the bad dad trope. You can search it up. There are a multitude of reasons of why screenwriters resort to the bad dad trope. One reason being that having a bad dad is unfortunately very common. It's far more common to have a bad dad than a bad mum. Just to go on a little bit of a tangent, one of my favourite films of last year was Marriage Story, and one of the best parts in it was Laura Dern's monologue where she was talking about the concept of being a good dad and how it really is only a thing of the last 20 and 30 years.
God is the father and God didn't show up.
Another reason for the use of the bad dad trope is that it is actually part of a story template called the hero's journey. It's a story template which a lot of screenwriters use, and it's often used to write a hero's fall, rise and victory. A stage of the hero's story is atonement with father/abyss. The protagonist must have a bad relationship with their father in order to save it/resolve it. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but as I was researching, I couldn't really find a TV show which blatantly romanticised daddy issues. Euphoria portrayed how daddy issues can manifest themselves in different ways in different people, such as Cassie's dad versus Nate's dad. And I think that the show Euphoria did this in a perfect way without romanticising it or glamorising it in any way. When it comes to music, this is where it gets a little bit sticky, because artists will often sing about sad and tragic things, and the lyrics of their songs will be so raw and real, but the song will sound so beautiful. This is where romanticisation can kind of start. Now, I'm not necessarily blaming artists for their listeners romanticising the stigmatised issues which they sing about in their music. But there's no denying that there are a lot of songs about daddy issues. There are a lot of singers where them having daddy issues is a big part of their brand. Their listeners and their fans, in particular young impressionable women, will romanticise the stigmatised issues they are talking about, in particular daddy issues. And they will start to think that stigmatised issues like daddy issues are cool, edgy and mysterious. The most well-known song about daddy issues is obviously Daddy Issues by The Neighbourhood. It's such a bop. The song was actually about lead singer of The Neighbourhood, Jesse Rutherford's relationship with his late father, but the song mainly focused on how daddy issues can affect women. And of course, I cannot talk about representation of daddy issues within music without talking about Lana Del Rey. Nowadays, especially since her weird Instagram post where she basically threw every high profile black female artist under the bus, I'm not a huge fan of her, but I have been listening to her music since I was 13 years old, and she has had a very large impact on my life growing up. Lana Del Rey's music and overall image is a mixture of glamour and angst. A lot of her music, in particular her older music, is about very stigmatised and toxic issues, such as toxic relationships, daddy issues, gold digging, dating older men, and of course a few references to the book Lolita. And Lana as an artist has left a huge mark on social media, in particular on Tumblr, but I will elaborate more on this point later in the video. It is a bit of a sticky one, because is Lana purposefully glamorising and romanticizing toxic issues such as daddy issues and toxic relationships? Or is she just singing about the stigmatized issues which she has experienced throughout her life? And is she inadvertently glamorizing it through that? Who is to blame here? Herself or her listeners? To be completely honest, I don't really know who is to blame, who really needs to take responsibility for romanticization and glamorization. On one hand, Lana's image is very glamorized and mysterious and sought after. So many people want to have this effortlessness that she has. She's cool, she's beautiful, she's mysterious, she is almost everything that some girls want to be. And because of this, surely she knows that a lot of her young impressionable listeners are going to glamorize her past reckless lifestyle, and that maybe she should be more careful about what she sings about. I don't really know where I stand. But on the other hand, artists can sing about what they want at the end of the day, and a lot of artists find comfort in writing songs about the hardest and darkest times in their life. Just because a song sounds beautiful doesn't mean they are purposefully glamorizing it. And just because an artist has a cool persona does not mean they can't sing about stigmatized issues. Like I said, I really don't know where I stand on this, so I'd love to know what you guys' opinions are. I have spoken about the romanticization and fetishization of daddy issues on my channel before, and romanticization of daddy issues isn't just exclusive to social media, it does happen in real life as well. Men constantly fetishize women's daddy issues and use them as some sort of leverage to feel like they're rescuing damaged women and helping them trust men again. But there's no denying that a majority of this romanticization occurs on social media, in particular on Tumblr, and I think the discussion around daddy issues on social media does really affect how young people perceive daddy issues. I do think the term romanticization gets thrown around a lot to the point of overuse, so I do just want to quickly define what romanticization is. Romanticization is as simple as making something romantic, and usually what you're making romantic shouldn't really be romantic. And you guys may be thinking, Jordan, what are you talking about? Daddy issues, Tumblr, romanticization, what's going on, love? I don't know whether this still goes on Tumblr, I don't know whether this aesthetic is still popular, but between the years of sort of 2014 to 2016, I believe it was called the pale grunge aesthetic, was really popular. And if you guys don't know what the pale grunge aesthetic was, I've created a list of how I define the pale grunge aesthetic on Tumblr. Arctic Monkeys AM, vinyls, Lana Del Rey, American Apparel tennis skirts, fishnets, Effie Stoneham, Doc Martens, cigarettes, sweater weather by the neighbourhood. And a big part of this aesthetic was having daddy issues. If you search daddy issues on Tumblr, there are thousands upon thousands of aesthetic posts. Edgy, cool, mysterious, angsty posts. Daddy issues. Having either no relationship or an extremely toxic relationship with your dad to the point where it affects your future relationships and it affects your self-perception and your self-esteem is used as an aesthetic. And I think that daddy issues being turned into an aesthetic really waters down how much it can impact someone. It almost waters it down into young girls having tantrums that their dads weren't around that much, when it's so much more than that, it's so much deeper than that. And to be fair, I'm not particularly criticising the people, in particular the young girls, who used to use daddy issues as an aesthetic, because guess what? I did the exact same thing. If you guys don't know, I will insert a few pictures. I was very much into this pale grunge aesthetic on Tumblr at the time when I was a teenager. I was a little bit obsessed with it, to be honest. I thought I was so cool because I was sort of one of the only people in my year at school that was really into this kind of aesthetic. And I used to reblog loads of these aesthetic pale grunge posts along with a lot of posts about daddy issues. and this is how I got exposed to daddy issues, and it wasn't necessarily the healthiest way to be exposed to it. I'd probably say around the ages of 11 to 12 I sort of started to realise the problems with the relationship I had with my dad, and I didn't really know what to do about it. I just felt really angry and really confused, and I didn't really know anyone that had the same problems that I did, so I was very much acting like a brat when I was younger because I felt like I was the only person that had these issues, because you know when you're a teenager you're literally so selfish. But when I did start using Tumblr and I found this pale grunge aesthetic, I found thousands upon thousands of posts about daddy issues. Now don't get me wrong, these posts weren't making out that having daddy issues was a good laugh or anything, but they made daddy issues seem cool and mysterious and edgy. And finally this problem which I had, which I hated about myself, that I was embarrassed about, that I was so angry about, I could finally use it to my advantage, and it made me feel cool. And I guess reblogging these angsty posts about daddy issues was a way for me to vent about it in a safe space where I knew no one would judge me. But I wasn't really confronting the issue properly. I was just taking pride in my daddy issues and using it as an aesthetic, and I used it to make me feel cool. I wasn't trying to fix my daddy issues, I wasn't trying to accept them for what they are, I was taking pride in them, and I felt really, really cool, which I don't think in my personal experience was very healthy. I was still very angry, and consuming these posts nearly every day for 2 years only made me more upset. Tumblr is full of young, impressionable people, and I'm not trying to gatekeep daddy issues here, but there were a lot of people who would use the daddy issues aesthetic when they didn't even have daddy issues, or they thought that having daddy issues was really cool, when in reality it's not, it sucks. I don't necessarily regret getting into that side of Tumblr and romanticizing my daddy issues for quite a while. I think everything happens for a reason, and I think I've really learned from the experience. I just don't think it was very healthy for me to do that. And I've only just accepted my daddy issues for what they are in the past year, I'd say. So yeah, stop romanticizing your daddy issues on social media. I never really do outros to my videos, I usually just put a card up, but I thought I would do an outro for this one. This has taken me 4 hours to film. This was really hard. I nearly cried like 3 times. I'm not gonna get into it, but this is really, really difficult for me to talk about. So I do apologise if this video was not up to scratch. I'm not really proud of this video, I'm not gonna lie, but I wanted to make it. And maybe making this is going to give me some sort of closure. Maybe it's going to help me feel a bit better, knowing that maybe some people can relate. And I know a lot of people can relate. I know I'm definitely not the only person that has this problem. Thank you guys for watching this video. Thank you guys for bearing with me throughout that video. Yes, and I'll see you guys in a couple weeks for a new video.